thank you so much for being here. My name is Paul. I've been doing this alchemy series for a while. We started with a standalone talk of just sort of the elements of alchemy, sort of the basic intro, and then we did a few on the emerald tablets. Last month we did one on psychology and alchemy, and how different elements of alchemy served as a model for the early development of psychology. And this month, what we're doing is getting into a little bit more of the essence of alchemy in terms of the three, the color phases and also the three principles. And this is Paracelsus. I just figured that would be a good image to kick things off with. Okay, so as I mentioned before, and I believe it was the first talk, I said one of the reasons why I really love alchemy so much and why I feel that it's a little bit underrepresented in, not in mystical traditions and mystical thought. There's most mystical traditions respect alchemy, but just the average person on the street, if someone said alchemy, they'd think, oh, is that superstitious or turning lead to gold or whatever. And I feel that because we live in a throwaway culture right now, where Raymond shared earlier, that throw away a little bottle, a plastic bottle, throw it away, don't think about it, and then it clogs up these magnificent creatures in the ocean, and all the ecological ripple effect of that, and that's really sad. But it's getting the cost of a chair reupholstered is a lot more than just going to IKEA and getting a whole new stuff. So unfortunately, there's some gifts to that, but there's a lot of challenges with the throwaway culture. Most people get new shoes, they don't get them resold. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing, the reason why I love alchemy and why I feel like this fits a very specific need right now, is that alchemy is about process. And one of the things that I love about the different maps of alchemy, like we work with the emerald tablet and the seven phases of alchemy, like that sort of scheme of alchemy, from that's in the image known as Aesop of the philosophers. Today we're going to be looking with a different one about the color phases of alchemy, like the black phase and the white phase and the yellow and the red. But no matter how you slice it, it's about process. So the thing I think is so interesting is that I feel like we in modern society are a little bit impatient with our lives, and we are not able to rest in process and be conscious with process. And as the result, I love movies, I love TV, literature, games, all these things, but it's funny because I see so often we find these externalized processes that we go through. Like we'll see a movie and we'll see the hero, or there's an action movie or love story, whatever it is, and we're so on the edge of our seat if the movie's good and the characters are good, we're on the edge of our seat just engaged in someone else's fictitious process. And we're like, oh, are they going to come together or not? And we're so present and so there for the whole process. Or literature, it's the same thing. Or with games. We sit down for this sort of artificial process where we roll dice and like, oh, great, I get some orange money now. Oh, here's some blue money. And we really get emotionally invested, like this is a real thing, this is serious. And we sort of dive into this world and we do this process and then we come up and out. So a lot of times, I think it's just kind of funny, but a lot of times people will be so frustrated and so adamant and so kind of pushing with the processes in their own life, but voluntarily take on the stress of these imaginary themes and stories and narratives, as well as games. And I think movies and literature and games and all of these things are so great, but I'm just thinking that, just as I said in one of the early talks, is that I believe that with subtle and gross, that one of the drives we have of making movies and TV and things like that is to sort of have witness consciousness. It's the feeling of stepping back and just purely witnessing. And when you're witnessing someone else's story, you can do that a little bit more than you might be able to do that in your own life. And I feel that meditation is sort of the original authentic way of stepping into that witness consciousness and sort of developing that muscle. And that because most people don't do that, or don't do that very much, but as a culture, we've adopted these other ways of witnessing. Another thing about that too, another possibility why I think it might be, is that it's showing us how to work with process in a lighter way. In our lives, we take things so seriously, and we might have a white knuckle grip on stuff to try to make something happen, or we need to get this job, or we need to change this thing, and we get so serious and so intense about it that can lead to a stuckness. And I feel like these ways of engaging a process that are lighter, that we can just practice moving through these things, knowing that, oh, it's only a game, Just my thought on it. Okay, so the first part of what we're going to talk about today is the 3 principles of alchemy: sulfur, mercury, and salt. So, can I see a show of hands? Anyone who's seen these symbols today? Okay, does anyone want to share where they're at in here?
On the cross?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. So, if you look at the cross when you first come in, there's each one of the the ends of the sort of the terminations of the cross have these 3 symbols. And if you look closer, each one of them will have a focus on one of them. So sulfur will be in the middle, and there'll be mercury and salt. And then it'll be mercury and sulfur and salt. So each one of these is kind of focusing on one of these aspects, and the other 2 are sort of supporting it. So what is it about these 3 elements that that are so essential? And we'll explore and see a little bit more about how they're sort of deep principles. It's not literally sulfur. It can be. It's not literally sulfur and literally mercury and literally salt. It's the principles, and these are how the alchemists sort of pictured the sort of the symbolic element to stand for that principle. Okay, so let's start with sulfur. So, in terms of elements, like the 4 elements, like earth, air, fire, water, it's basically a combination of air and fire. And it's also sort of related to soul, and it's sort of your own unique expression of life force. In the Ayurvedic tradition, it's called the dosha would be Pitta. In astrology, there's a fixed, mutable, and cardinal, and it'd be the cardinal for sulfur. And when I studied alchemy, I went to the Grand Lodge. I was lucky enough to study it there. And one of the first experiences we talked about and we went over was sort of the oil of egg. So the egg is this unique thing symbolically. And when you do the process of getting the sort of oil of the egg, it's sort of essence. And also too, like when Chris was here, and he did such an amazing job bringing that distillation unit, and he was distilling sage oil, where it was the hydrosoluble oil. So that relates to the essential oils of plants. Also, it's related to enthusiasm in terms of personality attributes. Enthusiasm, like sort of that primal excitement about life, getting up and just going and doing things and going and getting things. It's instinctual drive, but it's also like combustibility, that kind of thing. And then in terms of the shadow, there can be like compulsion, just like unchecked compulsion. Like some people are really driven by just compulsions and instincts, and they don't really reflect on it. And one of the alchemical phrases is "all haste comes from the devil," and it's basically the idea of that unchecked instinctual push or drive can lead to a lot of problems and chaos. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is mercury, and that's the elements of water and air. And again, too, just like the 4 elements, it's the same thing as mercury, sulfur, and salt. We're not really talking about, obviously, you put air and water together and you come up with mercury. It's basically those 2 essences come together and are basically this essence. So mercury is a mediator between the volatile and fixed elements. It relates to communication. In terms of Ayurveda, it's Vata, and astrology is the mutable signs. It also relates to spirit. So before we said soul, and this is spirit, sort of that vital spirit, that moving life force. It's related to speed, to happiness, liveliness, buoyancy, laughter, that kind of thing. It's about information, and it's also about communication. And in sort of the mythology, Hermes was considered the messenger, and would like for people to between the above and below, sort of being that conflict. So it's about communication. So one of the shadow aspects is there can be a sense of anxiousness or unsteadiness. And one of the things too is that anxiousness or anxiety, there's a lot of really interesting clues that I feel that are in language. And one of the words, the word anxiety, can literally, if you look at it, is any exit. So you're looking for any exit. You're feeling anxiety and you're looking for any exit to vacate the situation. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, about through the alchemical process, sort of the danger or the setbacks, maybe more likely, of if you leave a process too soon, or you dive out of a thing rather than being constant and really moving through the process and integrating it fully. So the anxiousness, the unsteady, the overly talkative, that kind of fast mercurial, qualities. Okay, salt. So the element is water and earth. So it's related to contraction. It is also related to crystallization or the manifestation of things. As a principle, when things become embodied and crystallized and are sort of coming in, and then when plans are set and things are set in stone in a sense, that is salt, is what it's talking about. It's about being embodied. The whole phrase of blood, sweat, and tears, the labor of life or a labor of love. They talk about a lot of blood, sweat, and tears being invested in it. In Ayurveda, it's related to Kapha. Astrology, it's the fixed signs. And also too, there's certain things like it can be steady and strong, but the other side of that, there can be a little bit of fixation. There can be a slowness, but it's also related to memory. So memory is a positive thing. You can remember, and we're calling it wisdom from what happened in the past. But if you overly attach to memory, it can slow you down. You're looking backward rather than moving forward. And interestingly enough, one of the shadows is, being depressive, but it's like stuck in the past. And one of the best illustrations of that is in the Bible, Lot and his wife leaving the city, and they were told never to look back. And Lot's wife turned back, and what does she turn into? A pillar of salt. So that's related to memory on the positive side, but on the shadow side, is a fixation on the past, a fixation on what's old. And too, with there can be a depression in terms of like sitting about all the things you could have said or could have done differently, and sort of that melancholy thing of, well, if this would have happened differently, looking back at the past in the same way. Okay, so one of the most important things to know is that sulfur, mercury, and salt, when you start working with them and start seeing them as essences in all the things that you do and how you act, how you are, your personality, they stop being these sort of arcane symbols, and you stop thinking about a lump of sulfur, and you start thinking about what it can mean. So just one simple example, and then we'll get into others, is sulfur and mercury. So you have mercury with its sort of a reflective, sort of ephemeral, vital, moving quality. It's very reflective. It's about communication. It's about moving back and forth of energy and insight. So mercury and sulfur together can lead to a feeling of these impulses and drives and compulsions or whatever it is, but a reflective quality of mercury, of communicating what's the core of that, what's the essence of that drive. And that informed way can help come back and shift the behavior, because it's sort of the idea of like an examined life versus an unexamined life. It's that the ability to look back at your own patterns and really see this. So, and when you reflect and you can come back, then you can actually choose and channel those instinctive energies in some other way, just like we talked about last month with the principle of sublimation. So I'm just going to back up here and have just the three symbols here at once and talk just a little bit more about sulfur, mercury, and salt, and how we can sort of see them in the world a little bit more. So, can I see a show of hands? Anyone who was here for my first alchemy talk, it was 6 months ago, I think it was, and it was all about, one of the things I talked about was, what are the three things that are always present with every kind of alchemy? Was anyone here for that? Okay, well, I won't put anyone on the spot. So what it comes down to is that the three elements that are always present in alchemy is you have to have something of a certain state to be raised in vibration or quality or value to a higher state. That's one. Two, you need to have some type of energy source fueling the reaction. And three, you need to have a vessel to contain it. So if you look at this, that's all right here. So sulfur, if you look at that, sulfur is the fire. That's the energy source. That's related to the fuel, the burning, the energy source to drive the reaction, the transformation. Mercury is a substance that's being transmuted because it's becoming fluid, it's changing, it's shifting. So it's sort of that in the process, it's kind of fluid. Salt, with its sort of fixed form, is the vessel. It's the crucible, it's the thing that's containing the whole reaction. So another way to think about this is try it. So anyone who does music, one of the things that I didn't know when I was first learning about music was that you have to have 3 or more notes to technically be a chord. That you have to have a minimum of 3 notes to express a tonality, like a C major chord, a C, E, G, C, E flat G, a C minor chord. So you have to have a minimum of 3 notes to express a tonality completely. When I was first learning music and I was on the guitar, you know, all the Smoke on the Water and Iron Man fans, technically that's an interval. Root and fifth, like the sort of the power chords, is actually an interval. It's not actually technically a chord because chords need to have 3 or more notes to be able to express a tonality. So it's really useful to start working with this and you know, and understanding the different ways you can see it. Another thing too is like, okay, so one of the things that I do is like I write talks and I give talks and things like that in classes and stuff. So I can look at this and say, well, what are the elements of teaching a class or whatever it is? So maybe maybe the sulfur, the energy, is the energy or emotion of conveying something. Mercury is about communication, is something being communicated. And salt is structure. Is what I'm saying a big rambling mess? Hopefully not. But if I'm really talking quickly and there's no discernible structure at all, then I'm low on salt, the salt principle. If there's a lot of energy and there's structure, but there's not a lot of communication, then it's low in this. If it's structured and it's fast, but it's energetically flat, then you would just need to boost sulfur. So it's really useful making your own notes on these and seeing how can you use these 3 principles. Another thing too is it's always useful working with consciousness to look at what you are attached to and what you are averse to. So if there's any of these energies, you're like, oh, I can't stand that, or I don't like that, or everyone who's crystallized or fixed in some, they're just stuck. Well, you probably have a pattern where you're judging structure. And as a result, you might be lacking that. If you judge the fieriness, the volatility, that sort of passion for life, you look at that. And then people that look at comedy and like communication and stuff like that, they may say, oh, that's really you know, insubstantial and it's not really valid because it's not strong and steady, that it's really kind of ephemeral. People might judge that, so they themselves will most likely become low in that principle, in Mercury. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is about color. So the next phase of what we're going to talk about today is about the color spectrum and the different phases of alchemy and how the different phases relate to color. So for anyone who was here for my talks that I gave on the Emerald Tablet, talking about the Azoth of the philosophers, it was this really amazing symbol where there's a wheel and there's like these legs and there's like these elements that are happening. There's a face in the middle of it, and each one has a different color and a different planet and all these different things. So that's a seven phase map, but it actually lines up really well with these 4 phases. The 4 phases I'm going to talk about really fall well on Azoth. So if you know Azoth, then this will make sense. And even if you don't, hopefully it'll make sense anyway. Okay, so one of the things that's really interesting about color, when I was kind of meditating on this stuff for the talk this month, is that color is really clearly a vibrational spectrum. And the certain colors, as you go up, are increasing in vibration. It's not a judgment to say this color is better than this color or whatever. It's physics. It's like this. It's vibrational frequencies. It's this clear light that can refract into all these different things. So when you talk about color, you can't talk about color without talking about vibration and vibrational rate. So when you're working with this, with alchemy, you can start to see that anything that can be described as an object automatically almost always has color to it too. So it's a vibrational quality of something that's another layer of how it's described rather than just the name of the thing. So one thing that's really interesting is how alchemy lines up with different cultures and their language and their conception of colors. So there's cultures that really don't have very much in terms of words for different colors, but they found there's a couple. They're out of Berkeley. They're wrote a paper. But basically you can look it up. But there's also a number of other people that sort of like cultural anthropologists that would look at different cultures, their names for colors, and if they only had a couple words for color, it'd be dark and light or black and white. If they had any words for color. If they had a third word for color, that color was always red. Blood is the third, always the third. The fourth and fifth is yellow and green. So which is kind of interesting because it's sun and growth, like foliage, like any kind of plant life. And it's kind of funny because sometimes it's green, sometimes it's yellow, but it's always going to be yellow and green in 4 and 5. And the thing that's interesting is that they're so interlinked, like photosynthesis is sun and green. So I think that's really interesting. And the last would be blue. So for some reason, consistently, the blue of the sky is less important or less central than dark and light and red, and then yellow and green. Just wanted to mention that as an interesting little side note, that there's some sort of internal primal feeling for these stages and how they relate to color. Okay. So Isaac Newton, I've mentioned him before. He's come up in a number of different talks that I've given. But for those who don't know, he did so much in terms of science, so much in terms of mathematics, but he actually had more books on alchemy than he did on math or science. So he did so much. He also did his own version of the Emerald Tablet, his own translation of it. So one of the things that I wanted to cover today in terms of the color conception of alchemy is that Newton is the one who created, and with everything else, our modern conception of color and light. So before Newton, there was Hooke. So Hooke was the one who originally said, well, what color really is there's the pure red light, and what we do is we add more and more blackness to the red light, and somehow adding black makes it green and all these things, and then then it gets to the cooler colors of blue, and then it gets darker and darker until it's black. So that's what people thought color was and how light worked before Newton started working with it. So Newton had a really ingenious way of putting this together and discovering what our modern color theory is and light theory, and it actually relates to alchemy, which is what a lot of people don't see. So what Newton had done is he got a prism, and he passed just pure like white light or clear light through the prism, and it refracted it into all the other colors. And I believe that because Newton studied alchemy, he went and turned that refracted light back into clear light. One of the biggest phrases of alchemy, all the processes of alchemy can kind of be summed down and compressed to solve and coagulate, is dissolve and gather, or dissolve and build. So dissolve and build and dissolve and build and dissolve and build. He doesn't just dissolve the light, he then builds it. So he took the clear light, refractive and color, and then put that back into a prism and made clear light again. And there's a lot of interesting things about the color wheel, all these things he developed. So one analogy that I think is so fitting of this is not just the solve et coagula with the light and how he discovered it, but say, for example, if you have someone who has a radio and they want to understand how it works. If you go and you can take apart the radio and pull all the components apart, you understand the parts of the radio. But if you can then put all the parts back together, turn it on and it works, then you understand the radio. Before that, you just have an inventory of parts. Yes?
How do you make white light from colors?
I believe that from what I read, he just had gotten another prism. It might have been like convex or something like that, but it basically was focused it back into, it was basically just, from what I understand, it was another prism. I don't know if it was shaped like this, but it was something that recombined them.
Wouldn't you, if you took colored glass of the red, yellow, green, blue, and white, and you all impose them on top of each other, you know, like this, wouldn't the center one then be white?
Possible. When I was, doing my research about this, it said that he had passed it through another prism. I don't know if it was colored or whatever, but basically the thing for me is that he took all these colors, it was clear light, and then refracted these colors, and then took all of these colors and then put them back into the clear light. So I feel that when someone really understands something, they can completely take it apart, but then they can put it back together and it'll still be the original thing. I feel like then I mean, like surgeons, hopefully they can take stuff out and also put stuff back in. You don't want to just lose stuff, So people that can take an organ out of the body and then put another organ back in or whatever it is, and the body still runs, then that's the level of understanding you don't get from just breaking things apart. For example, if someone was going to do analysis of something, like they were doing aesthetic work and they were like analyzing a novel or analyzing a movie, and they're breaking these things down into analysis, like an analysis of the character, the plot, all these other things, that is solving, that is dissolving it, that is breaking it apart into pieces. But then if you don't have the ability to create something, like a living, breathing work of art or something that is integrative, then you're just good at dissolving things, but you really can't build things. So this understanding, I feel, is like the next level of understanding. You can dissolve things down into their elements, but you can also put things to get back together, and they will have that same quality that they had originally. And I just feel like that's the next level of understanding things. It's solving a coagulant. It's dissolve and build, or dissolve and gather. Okay, so now for the phases of alchemy. So before, and I just thought, sometimes it's talked about gray or beige before the transformation, and I thought because we have we've studied Tarot in here, and sort of the full card, the 0, is there's smell of the rose that they're about to walk off. That's sort of the before state, sort of before the transformation. So I thought I'd just include that. So it can be gray, it can be beige, but it's sort of murky. It's sort of smoky, murky. It's sort of sometimes it's called the massa confusa. It's just this amorphous, not a distinct color, not a distinct form, just sort of a cloud of potential. Then what happens is it's the black phase. It's called the Nigredo, and it's basically the intense heat, intense cooking. When it comes to personal transformation, it can be difficulty. It can be the sort of the dark night of the soul. And each one of these, I don't want anyone to think that each one of these phases I'm saying is this is the good phase and this is the bad phase. They all have their amazing challenges and their amazing attributes. So going through difficulty or going through the dark night of the soul is not a bad thing. It serves a really deep, important purpose, and we'll get into that. So there's Albedo, the white phase. Then there's the yellow phase, is Citrinitas, and then the last one is Rubedo. That's the red phase. So we'll go into these in depth now. Okay, so number 1, black phase, Nigredo, is difficulties, dark night of the soul. It can be sorrow. From the Azoth, the original Emerald Tablet and Azoth, how they fit together, we talked about calcination, that heaviness, that lead, and it's sort of that burning, that sort of inertia, that sort of applying energy to that starting state. And in the black phase, it's about a lot of fire and a lot of heat, a lot of energy going into something to process something. It's extended cooking, but also too psychologically, it's about the unknown becoming known. So one of the things that if you're ever in a process, and if you try to abstract and know exactly what's going to happen next, and you try to get into a place of control, that's not allowing the space to give you the gifts of this phase. the gifts of this phase is sort of the unknown coming and becoming known, and the become process. And sort of the idea, if you're ever out in like the desert at night, or you're out in some rural area at night, there's not street light, you're driving, and you have the lights on the road. You can see just a little bit ahead of you. You have to go to a certain speed where you just allow new things to come in, and you navigate them. So that's part of what this is. It's the unknown becoming known. But because it's unknown, it's important to allow it to come from the depth and come in. One of the biggest problems that people have with this phase is because it could be unpleasant, it could be uncertain, there can be, in terms of mental or physical endurance, whatever it is, it can be really challenging to just stay with this phase. But if you think about the elements we talked about before, the sulfur, mercury, salt, if you can maintain the fixity of salt, that's the composure of that, you can keep the heat on, like the element sulfur, and you can keep reflecting and being aware and allowing your deep unconscious, your body, all of these, where the unknown is coming from, to communicate with you. You can get insight, so you can completely finish this phase and move to the next phase. So it's about, it can give the gifts of purifying, because it's a purge. All of this material is coming into your awareness, and you work and process it, and you can get strength from that. So this is an extremely, extremely important phase. And one of the things too is that, as I mentioned earlier in one of the earlier talks, is about questions. A lot of times people might be uncertain about something, they might have some confusion, and they want to have the answer. Well, what do I do this, do that? And if you're at a fork in the road and you really don't know what to do, one of the most difficult things is to allow yourself to just not know, to just allow yourself to be confused. And when you honor this faith and you stay with this faith, it can give you so many deep gifts. If you allow yourself to be in the question, like the Rosicrucian statement of being a walking question mark, if you allow yourself to sort of that negative polarity, like, let's see how this goes, let's see what's going to happen. Maybe I'll be in this phase for another day, maybe it'll be a month. You just honor the process and stay with it, and allow it to completely give you all of the gifts that are coming from outside of your awareness into you, all of those elements. And I've had lots of experience with this phase, actually. Sometimes I've done an intentional process or an intentional type of cleanse, and sometimes the universe is like, you're going to do a cleanse now, and I'll also a sudden be in this phase, in the depths of this phase. And but the most important thing is to stay with it, and to keep presence, to keep awareness, to honor this, and just fully be receptive as possible to the gifts that it's trying to give you. With a steady awareness, the steady reflection, and being physically present rather than trying to escape out of it. Okay, the next phase is Albedo, the white phase. So this is when there's intense cooking and grinding and all of these things happening in the black phase. And then all of a sudden, if you authentically move through these places, rather than saying, oh, it's all set, I'm okay, and you kind of dismiss the process, if you allow yourself to go through it, so you're like, wow, it really feels like it's lifted. It really feels like I've transmuted all of that material that was so difficult for me. You can start to feel a little bit of tranquility when you're not in the middle of this, feel like you're in the chase scene of an action movie. You can sit back and reflect upon it. You can say like, oh, what is this trying to tell me? What's trying to be, told to me? What's the meaning of what I just went through? What's the meaning of this whole process? You can step back and you can reflect on it. That is this phase. The only thing is that this is a comfortable phase, but because it's comfortable, it's easy to get stuck there. So if anyone's ever done the whole thing of you start doing something and there's some difficulties and you finally catch a break and you stay there, and you don't really move to the next phase. Another manifestation of this is the phrase paralysis by analysis. If you're working on some process in your life or something you're doing, and you're like, well, I had all this difficulty just now, I cooked all that away, now I'm in this nice puffy happy cloud, and I think I'm just going to sit back and think about stuff and avoid more difficulty. That is actually one of the worst things you can do, because this phase can have a self-satisfaction kind of feeling, like I've completed, I've done it. It sort of can be a closed loop, sort of like a. So one of my peeves is especially with rich symbols that have so many meanings. When people say, "Oh, the Ouroboros means it's a cycle," or "the Ouroboros really means this," I kind of have a little bit of a peeve with that because I feel that these rich symbols that have so much depth and meaning, to honor them is to see all the layers of them, all the things they can mean. If this Ouroboros is in this context, it can mean this thing. In this other context, it can mean this other thing. So one of the, along with cycles, along with all these other amazing meanings for the Ouroboros, like the snake biting its own tail, is that it can be a closed loop. You can be a vacuum. You can just endlessly ponder and think about the difficulties and feel like, yeah, I got the lesson. But you're not allowing yourself to open up and to be moving into the next phase. Something that will really move you on a deep level forward. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the best part of this is being able to sit back and reflect and get understanding and wisdom. The biggest challenge is to get stuck there, or to get, to not want to leave the padded nest or the feathered bed, kind of just staying in the place of comfort. And along comes yellow. So real quick, so this relates to stage 4, is creation of the lesser stone. And I was giving the talk in the Emerald Tablet that talked about the 7 stages of alchemical transformation. Creation of the lesser stone in stage 4 is actually the creation of gold, but stage 7 is silver. And I talk about my own take on that, about silver relates to vitality and life, as it's a symbol for life rather than gold. So just so you know, so Azov stage 4 is related to this. Okay, so Citrinitas, the yellow. So this is related to stage 6, which is fermentation. So you have the early success, like, yay, it's all working. I did the firing, I did all of this stuff, and there was ease, and now all of a sudden things are rotting, things are spoiled. And that can seem like a setback. That can seem, if you don't know this way of working with things, it can feel like you're failing. It can feel like things are falling apart, that you're just with all of this stress. So what's really important is like the yellowing, is one of the best examples is milk being cultured to make cheese. Also too, I do fermented vegetables, and I do different probiotics and stuff like that I culture and do. So the yellowing, like one of the ones is I do sauerkraut, and I press cabbage to make sauerkraut. There's a certain yellowing that happens with this, but the challenge is spoiling rather than culturing. So if I don't process it in the right way, it's not the probiotic cultures, there can be mold, there can be other things that come in. So that's kind of the challenge of this phase, to allow the yellowing. And the yellowing is not a spoiling, it's about new life. As I said in the Azov talk on the Emerald Tablet, the 7 phases, it's new life coming into it. It can feel like a spoiling, it can feel like a setback, but new life, new challenges, new things are coming in. And what it's called is called the rescue from the white. And there's the alchemical saying that you don't really live in white. That sort of a disembodied existence, you're like living life at arm's length. If you get stuck in the white phase, it's all philosophizing about things rather than engaging and actually doing them. So this, through throwing a little bit of chaos in there, or a little bit of controlled spoiling, or whatever it is actually rescuing from the stasis and the vacuum and sort of the self-satisfaction of being in the white phase, ease of that. So I have this word antifragility down here. And I just wanted to talk about this really quickly because this is, I feel, a really, really important concept. So there's a book called Antifragile by a guy named Nassim Taleb, and he's really amazing. He's actually worked as an options trader and worked in the stock market, and he studied how volatility and uncertainty can lead to strength and can lead to certain systems and certain ways of being benefit from stress and disorder. And I think that's a perfect analogy because in the white phase, there's no stress, no disorder. It's all just it's like there's harp sounds, baby. You're floating on the clouds, but you're not transforming. Like we're here on physical reality to transform. So with the rescue from the white, with anti-fragility is, Nassim basically says that there's fragility. When there's uncertainty, certain things get stressed and break apart. That's fragile. Resilience is strength. Resilience is the ability to handle stress and uncertainty. Anti-fragility is depending on stress and uncertainty for strength. It's uncertainty and volatility is a fuel source that makes it stronger. So what's really important to know about this is that whenever people have setbacks, if they understand fragility, resilience, and anti-fragility, you can actually use these setbacks, just like the yellowing phase, these apparent setbacks or these challenges to propel you into the next stage of growth. Things like, like I mentioned before, being in a state of uncertainty, having a question, and just allowing yourself to rest in the question. If you have that, the thing that you felt was uncomfortable, and you allow yourself to just rest in it, it starts to open up, and you start to experience it in a different way. One of the things I've done a lot of is the hot and cold exposure, like ice cold exposure or cold showers. When you first do it, there's this thing, but then when you start to experience it in a different way, your whole system opens up and you feel it in a different way. And in the same way, if you allow yourself to feel comfortable in not knowing, you allow yourself to feel comfortable in cold water or some type of stress or some type of thing that used to be experienced as a stress, your whole system will expand. And I think I mentioned before, there's some people that walk in the rain and they have an umbrella, but some people don't. They can either, just kind of walk and say, okay, I'm just gonna get wet, or some people do this, And a lot of times, with most things in life, it's that tension, it's our stress response to the thing that's most of the negative thing that we're experiencing, not really necessarily from the thing itself. It's our aversion to it. So I just wanted to mention that too with this phase, that I've done a lot of things. I've done some practices and some different things, like certain, I've kind of walked my own path. A lot of the things I've done or studied or, a little unconventional, how I've walked through life. So I've definitely fallen down a lot, and I have a really intimate and working relationship with the floor, But the thing is, if you work through all of these processes, and with consciousness, you can step back and journal to say, what is it that life is inviting me to become? What are the capacities that I lack that are making this process difficult? And if you do this, if you write this, and you have this 4-phase process, or you have the 3 elements of alchemy, you have the Azov, whatever resonates most with you, if you have some type of a form, and you do these things and work through it in some way to really get the deep lessons from what you're doing, every time you fall down, you will get up as a new person. You can get up and understand that the falling down is a gift if you have the capacity to grow from it, rather than, because if people just are in the white phase and they kind of have that mentality that life is about avoiding suffering, and they put their money and resources to avoiding any kind of stress, and they kind of put themselves in the bubble, that is stagnation, that's stasis, rather than a real alchemical process. And the more you're aware of these processes and ways to work through it, the more you can keep outgrowing the old problems you used to have. Don't worry, the problems will come. But you are on a path that is continuing to expand. Okay, so the last of the phases is Rubedo. So this relates to blood, and this is basically about vital life force. This is about creating life. So red stands for blood. It's the vital life force, and this relates to the greater stone. That's actually Azov stage 7. It's sort of like in Azov, you go to the gold, there's the lesser stone, and then you have putrefaction, then you have distillation, then you have coagulation. That's the final stage. Creation of the greater stone, creation of the greater thing. So people that go past they get through the struggle, and they get into the comfort of the lull, and then they allow dynamic processes to off-center, offset, destabilize, ferment, spoil, whatever it is, and then move through to the last phase. It creates vitality. And if you work with anti-fragility and you work with resilience versus fragility, and you learn how to channel and work with all these different things, use them for their highest potential to really develop you, it creates what? It creates more vitality and more strength. More of what will help you move to the next phase of your development. So the challenge with it is hastening the process. And there's the warning in alchemical texts about the hazards of reddening too quickly. That's kind of people that hear about something and say, oh, I got it. And they'll kind of maybe move a little bit through something, but then they'll kind of step outside of it and say, yeah, I got that lesson, I understand it. But they didn't really live it. They didn't really fully embody it. So the big warning with the red phase is, did you really move through the process? Did you move through these phases completely and authentically with full presence? Or did you kind of skip along? So reddening too quickly is the biggest warning that they have. And, one of the gifts of Yuan, he said that this phase is a merging of the ego and the self. And also from the Emerald Tablet, there's the phrase, its strength is perfected if it is turned to earth. So that's one of the things that I believe is about the principle is perfected if it's manifested. If you can take the metaphysical idea, the metaphysical concept, and bring it down to earth and change things on earth, change things in material reality, you've perfected it. You understand the principle so that it actually is a manifest thing. You don't know how to take the radio apart. You put it together and it works. Okay, so this is the end of the talk. I just wanted to touch on these last couple things. So if you have paper and pen or whatever you would like to take notes with, it's really important to kind of pause and think about these two questions. And we can talk about this as well. So, how balanced are you in terms of sulfur, mercury, and salt? Do you have one that is like your comfort place or how you habitually move through the world? Do you have one that's really hard for you? So I'll just share for myself that, out of all the three of them, my tendency is to have a little bit more mercury. My mercury is boosted. But I write a lot, I talk a lot, I kind of laugh a lot. I have more than a normal amount of mercury. But, so I'm always looking at my sulfur and the salt to say, okay, the vital energy and the emotion and the form and the structure, to not skip around, to really master something, like to really focus on something and have the steadiness and structure from the salt, have the vital energy from the sulfur, and not just be skipping around like the mercurial thing, and saying, oh, there's this idea, there's this thing. That's kind of my challenge. I'm interested in a lot of things. I do a lot of writing, a lot of stuff like that. So I know that, yeah, elevated levels of mercury, So that's something to really keep in mind, to know, what's your tendency? Do you have a feeling of what you maybe have a little bit more of than what's slightly out of balance? Does anyone want to share anything about that? Either a question, insight, or anything like that?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Is there a specific element that you feel you might have a little bit more that might be slightly off balance?
Yeah, sometimes it
Yeah.
happens.
So,
That's
Yeah.
why it is. You'll be able to balance it.
Right, but also too, like I mentioned with anti-fragility, there's something about starting to fall over, you will know your balance in a new way. If you allow the uncertainty and the randomness to sort of throw you a little bit, you get the skill of catching yourself. The other thing too I wanted to mention about anti-fragility is that resourcefulness is usually inversely proportional to resources.
Yeah.
So if you have infinite resources, your resourcefulness will wither. But if you have very little resources, that's what makes you resourceful. If anyone ever saw the old show like MacGyver, like, oh, I've got a stick of gum and a safety pin, and I can make a bomb out of it. It's like, it's a crazy example, but I'm just saying, like, if you work on developing resourcefulness and resilience and anti-fragility, you become the resource. The resources come, that you see everything around you as a resource, and you can pull it in, you can do these transformations, and then it's all going to come from what's around you. rather than you having to wait for the stars to align and the perfect resource to be dropped in front of you. So it's just one other thing I wanted to share.
And also, not quitting.
What's that?
Not quitting.
Not waiting, yeah.
Quit.
Right,
You
yeah.
have to continue whatever is you needed to do. Keep going.
Right, exactly. So say for example, if someone did have the quality of, yes, exactly. If someone had the quality of, if they were like, okay, I'm a little bit of an impatient person, if someone said that, then it could either be sulfur, they've got that impatience of they just gonna drive through and push everyone out of the way and get what they wanna get, or is it patience, they can't sit still, like they're dancing around, that's more Mercury. So it's about looking at your qualities and also looking to say, impatient in what way? What's the energy behind that? Is it more fluid and moving, ever moving, or is it more like burning, blasting through? Okay, so that's the first one. Just keep in mind, sulfur, mercury, and salt. And also too, you might have more of an imbalance in one thing with a certain relationship or a certain person or a certain context, and you might have a different imbalance in another context or with another group. So it's just something just something to think about. The other one too is that what are your tendencies in transformation? Do you have any attachments or reversions? So would anyone like to share anything about when it gets heavy and intense? I just can't. I gotta get out of there. I can't stand the feeling of that purge of sort of the Nigredo. Or I can't. I get into the paralysis by analysis in the white phase, and I just have to sit on my cloud, and it takes me years to move forward. Or if there's the yellowing, like, I can't allow these random things to happen, and I react really strongly to it, like the culturing and the spoiling or the randomness or uncertainty or stress or whatever you want to call it coming in, that I go like this and I try to run back to my cloud, like, I gotta go back to my white phase. I'm out of here, I don't want this, Or, do you jump to the red phase, but it's not really the red phase because you kind of skipped across the stream. You didn't really fully go through all the phases. So does anyone want to share anything about that? Yes?
So, I actually tend to be in the white phase quite a bit.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of people that do metaphysical stuff, I mean, I know that we all have this tendency, I have this tendency to want to speculate, want to analyze, stuff and kind of be on the cloud. So yeah, sorry.
Right, and
yeah.
it is, like, I see the word when it says endless perfection as in the sense where I'm always trying to, constantly, there's always a challenge I'm trying to get through. So the white phase is I say the gift is, it is kind of like an ease and tranquility, but at the same time, it's kind of, at least for me, it's a little bit more intense than that, just because of the fact that it's so, you can't get anything to perfection, at least, or there's always something that you always want to perfect.
Right.
So it's kind of, it's kind of similar in a way where it's like never ending.
Right.
But at the same time, it doesn't, I guess it just feels a little different.
Right.
I tend to be in the white phase a lot, just, I don't know why, just like I said, the pink things.
Yeah, no, but that's such a great thing to notice. The other thing too is that if the white phase, if you feel that being in the white phase a lot, that you like the perfection or the ease or the balance, another thing too is that if it's a distaste for imperfection, aesthetically you like the balance and the poise and the perfection of that thing, another way you can see it is to say, what if the process is the perfection? It's like, one of the sequences that I study and I've worked with is the Fibonacci sequence, the golden mean spiral. So the Fibonacci, when nature is creating a plant, it'll put a petal out, and then a petal out, and then 2 petals out, and then 3 and 5 and 8, and it's always adding the last 2 numbers to do the next growth. So the thing that's interesting is if you take the phi ratio, or the theta, or whatever, it's like 1.618, this long string of numbers. The thing that's interesting is if you take the phases and divide them out to see the proportion, you're a little bit above theta, and then a little below, and a little bit above, and a little below. But each time you do this, you're getting closer and closer to it. So if you look at it that way, nature is not trying to say, let me sit in the white phase and then plant. It's sort of like and it's honing. It's like a potter spinning clay on a wheel. It's like going through the process of creating perfection through the process, allowing the process to do it.
To create something.
Yeah, exactly. So as the Fibonacci sequence, you can look at it, you can do it mathematically, and see it's getting closer and closer to that perfect. It's never resting there. It's going through it a little bit too much and not quite enough,
Kind
and
of
a
like
little bit.
right?
Yeah, so it's like a sine wave. It's like a pendulum coming to rest, and that's how nature does it. So I think that I always like to look and see how I'm doing things and say to model things as much as possible on natural processes, because I figured, how long's nature been doing it and been successful? So I try to cut the learning curve as much as I can by studying sacred geometry and certain natural forms to do that. So it's really important to look at what are your tendencies for the transformation, the 4 phases, also the 7 phases that I said before, the Emerald Tablet talk that I gave. So if you have attachments, you will tend to rest in a place. If you have aversions, you might tend to not honor that phase and really fully go through and be transformed by it. And so it's almost like you're missing those nutrients. Like if you never eat fruits or you never eat vegetables, you eat this, but you're going to become deficient in these nutrients. So if you honor the alchemical process and you make sure that you're going through it all, you can kind of journal, and journaling is a really great tool for self-awareness to say, what am I not tolerant of? What am I not patient with? And see, how can I be more patient when I'm in the white phase and then uncertainty comes in the yellow phase? How can I say, this is beautiful, this is amazing, this foliage is perfect, and this uncertainty, this stress, and move through to bring it into earth, to bring it into blood, to bring it into life, and complete it with the red phase. So anyway, so that's my talk for this week, or for this month. I always do that, I don't know why. So anyway, but thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for your questions and your insights and everything.